Hello and welcome back to the Nulyweds channel. So today we are talking to Andri from Always Andri about weddings in London. This is my hometown. I'm so excited to bring you this conversation because I miss London a lot. I haven't been since 2019, so it was really lovely to speak to Andri about weddings in London. I'll also give my insights from being in the wedding industry in London too. If you want to check out any of the other places that we have been on this worldwide planning series, then do check out the playlist that will be linked at the end of the video and in the description box down below. Without further ado, let's dive in.
So I'm joined here by the lovely, the vibrant, the fun Andri from Always Andri. Thank you so much for coming onto the channel.
Absolutely my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
So today we are taking a little journey back to my hometown. We're going back to London. We're talking about weddings in London. I'm really excited to dig into this with you. But first, tell us a bit more about your business, about you, and about how you got into weddings.
Oh, fantastic. So I run Always Andri, a London-based wedding planning company, very much with a design focus. So I like to work very distinctive, creative weddings for couples that really want something that's very individual to them and not sort of cookie cutter wedding. I got into weddings so my background is theatre design. I actually had a theatre design degree, went to drama school. I used to work at the BBC costume store. And then when the BBC were going through their changes and stuff, they made us all redundant. Yay. And I'd actually been married for about 7 years since then. But at the time when I was planning my wedding, it felt very much like theatre design. It was like putting on a production. And so I thought when I left the BBC, I thought, oh, I could become a wedding planner. I'd kind of dabbled it, thought about it when I first got married, but I didn't even know it was a job. I looked into event management, didn't think wedding planning was actually a job. And then 7 years later, when I looked again, I was like, oh no, look, there are actually now wedding planners. So I did a bit of training, got into it that way, and yeah, I just love it. Like I say, it's very much that theatrical production for me. It's like my couples are the stars of the show and I'm their artistic director, manipulating everything in the background, pulling all the team together. So that's kind of how I like to approach weddings, and really make them individual to the couple and make them quite creative. I don't really do cookie cutters or chair covers. That's me.
Amazing. That's so amazing. It's really strange that I didn't know that about you, that you're in theatre design, because we go way back, don't we?
We met when you worked in London. Yeah. I often forget to tell people that side. I've had people say that to me, like, your background is theatre design, why do you not say more? And I was like, oh, I forget. So I'm trying more recently, I've been mentioning it a little bit more. I actually met my husband at drama school. So
really?
They're training to be a director while I was doing backstage stuff, the design and the stage management. But yeah, I love theatre. I love it.
Oh, fascinating. That was really cool. So let's talk about our hometown, and we'll talk about London. So why should a couple from across the world consider getting married in London?
I think London is such a great location for a destination wedding. I mean, obviously London's iconic. Who doesn't know about London? It's got great travel connections, so it's easy to fly into. And I've often worked with destination couples, and one of the reasons they give is just the ease of it, which is to get to London. But I also, what's great about London, it offers such versatility and choice. There's such a range of great venues, locations that you can get married in. You can have the very city wedding, in the heart of the city, very kind of that kind of sort of wedding. But at the same time, you're not that far from almost like a countryside wedding with beautiful grounds and gardens. And I just think that it really gives you such a great choice. It's also a great location to guests to come and stay in, to become their kind of hub. If they're then going to spend a few days in London, they get to all the tourist attractions, the great food, the great sights, go visit a theatre show or something. And I just think it's that versatility of London that just makes it such a great destination location.
Absolutely. There's so much going for London. Obviously, I'm completely biased, having grown up there and have a huge amount of affection for it, and worked in venues in London for a long time. But even beyond that, I think that London is a lot more surprising than some people may think. There are sides to it that you don't see from television or movies, or, you know, the photos of it raining all of the time. Like, there's so much more to London that it's really worth exploring. But we can talk for ages about what's wonderful about London. Let's talk about what's not great about London, because I mean, I could go on for ages as well.
I think in the context of a wedding, London is going to be more expensive. I think there's no denying that. The average cost of an average wedding in London is a lot more than like the national average. So I do think you probably do need to budget more for a wedding in London. And I think to a certain extent, depending on what time of year you get married, you might have to put up with the tourists depending on the location, and you might not want the tourists. So I think those, to me, probably it's kind of like a double-sided, two sides of it, isn't it? I think cost probably is the biggest kind of negative. I think for some people, they want maybe something a bit more low-key. London's going to be difficult, but I think the advantages outweigh that in many ways, because it just gives you so many opportunities and so much choice about where you can go. And London is a big city. Like I say, there's more to London than you think. It is a big city, and it's actually a incredibly vibrantly green city. There's actually so many beautiful parks and open spaces in London, and some lovely venues with lots of lovely outdoor space. So while you might have to put up with the British weather and things might cost you a bit more, I think it's worth it to just get that kind of the range of choice that you get in London.
Absolutely. And I think the tourism point is actually really, really good point, because when you met me, I was working near St. Paul's Cathedral, which is like one of my favorite building in the world, probably. And there were many people who would come over just to have their engagement photos or their second wedding photos in front of the cathedral. So they'll come in their dress and their suit, not getting married on the day, but just to take a photo in front of this iconic building. And if you have like a swarm of tourists, it really does ruin that you know, the vision that you were looking to have with this iconic building in this iconic city. So it is something to bear in mind. But on that point, when do you think is the best time to get married in London?
So I think London kind of works, depending on the venue you choose, really does work at any time of year. So I've done some beautiful winter weddings in London, and I've done some beautiful summer weddings in London. My personal favourite is September. I always think you get some really lovely weather in September, and you've also got that kind of autumn is starting to kick in. You get all those lovely, gorgeous autumnal colours. I did a beautiful autumn wedding, and I want to say last year, but I actually mean the year before now, because we all know about last year. Didn't do a wedding last year, but yeah, I did a beautiful, and it was so lovely. And the couple, we did some first look shots, and the couple were walking down the Mall, and we had like black cabs going by, and actually that case was the tourists were like happily waving, and they didn't get in the way, and it was just so lovely. You had all the lovely kind of browning orangey leaves in the trees, and it was a beautiful crisp blue sky, lovely day. And I think that's, for me, September is, and I got married in September, so I'm clearly biased. But I just think it's a lovely time of the year in London, because you can get some really nice weather. It's not likely you'll get like too hot, because you don't, like, some of the really hot days in London can be a bit suffocating. I remember once doing a wedding quite near to St. Paul's, actually at Stationers Hall, and it was like the hottest day. We had a couple of guests fainted. It was just so hot. We were like running around with water bottles and fans for the guests and things, like to cool them down. So it can be, I say, July, August can be a bit too hot for London, whereas I find like all September is just a really nice month, and actually early October can be surprisingly warm in London as well. But yeah, I think any time of the year though, you can have some, like I say, there's some really great winter wedding venues in London that just work so well too.
Absolutely. And because as Brits, we know what the weather is going to be like. We have very warm interiors, you know. It is quite perfect for winter weddings, because we have, you know, carpets and fireplaces and, you know, really warm and cozy feeling interiors. So if you want that vibe, then it's a beautiful place. But I want to come back to the summer months, actually, because you raised an excellent point in that London is sticky. It does get hot. We do have warm weather in London. It is possible, and it is very sticky. What about the springtime? How is that?
Yeah, so spring can be again lovely. So I say is I would think you have the slight, I think the slight risk that it might rain in a spring wedding, but weirdly enough, I say I like a May June wedding or a September October wedding. I've done a few July weddings which have been lovely and really nice, but almost occasionally too hot in July. So July can go a bit too hot, and I've actually had some quite wet weddings in August. I actually think August is like the worst. Everyone gets married in August, but
it's so terrible.
I think August is a great month for weddings. I genuinely don't think August is a great month for weddings. Saying that, I have a wedding this August. I'm hoping it's going to be okay. But it is one of those kind of temperamental months, August. So you mean so? But my feeling is actually when you do like a destination wedding, you're going overseas, you could potentially rely on the weather. But any UK wedding, I would never rely on the weather. I would always have a backup, have an option, have a plan. Like, you mean, what will we do if the weather's not so great? And I think if you plan for the worst, and when you get the best, then that's brilliant. It's great, but you've got that kind of backup for yourself. But yeah, I love a nice spring wedding, like a late May, early June is lovely. So yeah, you absolutely, like I say, I think the weather in the UK is actually quite, I know we do get a lot of rain, but I think we have that nice kind of happy medium of you do get some beautiful spring days and you do get some lovely autumn days. So you're not necessarily relying on September. And in the same way, it could rain in the spring and it could rain in autumn. It could just as easily rain in the summer. So that's why I feel like just don't rely on it. But yeah, I think that's what makes, I think, just the range of venues you can have. You can actually almost kind of adapt to, like, think, okay, what's the weather gonna be like? If it's this or this, do you mean what can we do? And kind of work with it rather than like fighting against it, sort of thing.
Yeah, no, you make a great point. And we have all of the seasons as well, which is really nice. We don't get that in a lot of other places in Europe, particularly when you come to the south of Europe where I am. We don't have the defined seasons the same way that you do in London. And London in each season is really beautiful. Ooh, sorry, fly. So let's do a scenario then. Do this to everyone. This is actually not probably not completely out of the realms of possibility, but let's say that I am engaged and I want to come home to London and I want to get married in London. Not out of the realms of possibility. I might actually be asking you to do that one day, because I'm not planning my own wedding, just for anyone out there. So we've got 50 guests and I am marrying a South African, let's say, and we're bringing 50 guests over and we want to get married anywhere in London, nowhere specific. What do you think would be a good budget for us to start with?
So again, because there is such a range in venue styles, it depends what kind of venue you want one. But I always think a good way of like getting that kind of ballpark is thinking about like what kind of meal would you like to eat in London? What kind of restaurant would you love to go in? If it was just the two of you, and then how much would you actually spend on that meal? So I think as a starter in London, like a really nice 3-course meal, couple of bottles of wine, maybe a bit of champagne because you're going to celebrate. You're probably looking at minimum 100, maybe even 150. So I think, and then if you times that by 50 guests, and then you're going to need to add maybe some flowers and a florist and like all the other bits that come with it. I think kind of for that kind of wedding, you would probably, I would say, what I don't know the maths. What is that? Yeah, you're probably looking around 40 to 50k, aren't you, for that kind of wedding in London? But that's not to say you have to spend that amount. You could go really low key. You could do like a pub wedding and like have it quite like do different type of food, like bowl food or something. You can do a very low key kind of wedding. And I've kind of done both sides. And that wedding usually you could probably maybe do around 20, 30. And I think the average for London is around 20. So it really just comes down to like what kind of wedding do you want. I did a lovely wedding a few years ago between Christmas and New Year, and that was most of the guests come from the US. I think we had around 40, 50 guests, and we did like a ceremony, and then we were like really hammering home the British thing. And so we did like pie and mash after the ceremony. Then they got on a bus, they went on the London Eye, and then they had their meal was in a pub, but it was like a really lovely like ploughman's lunch followed by roast beef. And then we had like piano playing, like musicians that would take like real like Cockney geezers, like taking like requests and things. And you know, we had crackers, because apparently they don't have crackers in the US. They don't do pull crackers. That's
They
like
don't
a real
do
English
that?
thing. No, they don't pull crackers. Did you know that? I didn't know that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't know that. But we really went to town with lots of beautiful flowers and lovely stationery details. We had like illustrated of the venues and everything. And that's it. We paid for everyone to go. Like we had 2 pods on the London Eye, and that was around 40k. But that was a real experience for the guests. You know what I mean? We didn't just put them to one location and then like that's it. We treated them to like a whole day, because it was quite an early ceremony. It was like a midday ceremony, so it was like a whole day of events. And that was just lovely. Do you know what I mean? And the guests felt really spot and really looked after. So it was just a really lovely day. So you can kind of spend as much or as little as you want. I would say absolute minimum, if for 50 guests, I wouldn't go below 20k. But for like a real experience, I think 40-50k for those numbers. And I've done weddings 50-60k for 100. Because it all kind of goes up, and it depends what you want really. But yeah, I wouldn't go. Like, so when they say the average, you're like, and then the average says things like £300 for a dress. I'm like, no, I think the dress is a bit more than that, or photographer, or flowers. But yeah, it kind of really is how much do you want to spend, and what kind of experience do you want to give your guests.
Absolutely. Okay, not a bad place to start. And yeah, I having worked in London, I'd probably say the same. Definitely. Sticking on this point then, with my South African, we want to register to marry in London. Piece of cake for me. Obviously, I am from London. I could probably do the registration where I was born. But how simple a process would it be for him?
Yeah. So for South African, I suspect he would need a visa. So obviously you have to go through his visa. So basically in the UK, to get married in the UK, you need to be resident in the UK for at least 7 days. And then after 7 days, you can then give notice. And then after 29 days, you can get married. So that's even for like Brits, that's the kind of process they have to go through. So where I've had like destination couples, what they'll often do is they'll maybe like come over at Christmas and stay with family. And then they're able to, they get that kind of residency, like, qualification, as it were, to be in the country, and then give notice, and then they'll come back. But again, it would depend on what country you're coming from, like and obviously it's got a lot more complicated now with Brexit and Europe, whereas before it'd be a bit easier. Like I say, it is a visa issue, and I don't want to get into the legal side of it, but basically it's the residency, then you can give notice, and then you can get married. A lot of my overseas couples, what they tend to do is they actually get the legal stuff done at home where they are. So if they're in the US or wherever they are, they get that out of the way then, and then they'll have what's called a symbolic ceremony in the UK, and that makes life so much easier. It makes it easier for them, it makes it easier for us, and also with a wedding celebrant, you can have a really personal ceremony as well. And like really, I love celebrant-led weddings, so I also, as well as wedding planning, I do wedding celebrancy as well, and I just love that personal connection that you can make with both your celebrant with the couple and the couple with the celebrant, and really tell like the couple's story and everything. And I often will recommend that to my couples, that like, unless there's a particular reason they need the legal bit to happen in the UK, or maybe they want like a religious wedding, because then that's a whole nother, again, you have to check how it works. I would always suggest going with like a symbolic wedding, if that's going to make it easier. Like in your case, so you've got the residency side, would probably be easier for you because you're UK born and bred. It just gets a bit complicated maybe when one of you isn't UK, and that, like, or if both of you, especially if both of you aren't, then it just gets really complicated. But yeah, I would always say be open to a symbolic celebrant-led ceremony, because they can be so beautiful and really lovely and just so personal, and guests love them as well, because they feel like get a real insight into the couple too.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that civil weddings in Portugal are terrible. It's literally like a script. I do think that civil weddings in the UK are slightly nicer. Like, they do make an effort with their scripting. You can get a really nice one.
Now a lot of councils will give you like the modern script, the traditional script.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, like Westminster Council, for example, they have that. I think, was it modern, traditional? They've got, I'm sure there's like 3 or 4. I can't remember what the other 2 are, but I remember there's like the modern and the traditional one. So they do give you a little bit of choice. And I had one of my couples, they did Westminster. They kind of mixed, they picked and choose, and they let them do that. They let them kind of like put a couple of scripts together, so they actually were able to build their script. What you don't have though is that maybe that personal connection and like necessarily even knowing who it is that's going to marry you.
Exactly.
Sometimes they literally pick it that week. Sometimes you're lucky, depending on the borough, you might get a really cool, you actually might get to meet your celebrant or your registrar. But yeah, it's better than it used to be. But it really does depend on where you're getting married, like what borough you've got married in, and that's what their registrars are like in those boroughs. So you might hit gold, like Westminster, they've got some really nice registrars, or you might not be so lucky. You just
exactly. And you meet them like 30 minutes before the wedding, and yeah, there's no personal touch. I did not know about the residency. That's really interesting, so thank you for that. I did not know about that. It was really cool. So I want to come back to pie and mash, because I think we're going to need to explain this to some people. A lot of people will know about traditional English food and probably have a lot of preconceptions about said traditional English food, but let's make a case for having a wedding in London, because the food is better than you think it is. We've got this very antiquated idea, particularly overseas, of English food being really bland, being tasteless, being, meatless and all that kind of thing. Tell us what wedding food is really like.
Some of the best food I've had has been wedding food. Because I often go to a lot of the tastings with my couples, and I'm just sitting there like, oh my god, this is so amazing. Do you know what I mean? I think the chefs in London are such high caliber, even at venues, or the catering chefs. There's a lot of independent caterers, and they have really great chefs. In fact, you mentioned the pie mash. Well, I mentioned the pie mash, didn't I? But actually, that was just a street food vendor, and that was delicious. It was so nice. He sent us like pie to my house, and then I remember like giving it to they were over from the US for a few days, so I was like, he sent it to me, and then I gave it to them, and then they took it home, and they were like, and it was still amazing. Do you know what I mean? And that was just a street vendor sending out some pie. Do you mean? So I think the quality of food in the UK now, particularly London, we've got some amazing chefs that are like residents at certain, like the hotel. I don't even do hotel weddings, so I don't particularly like hotel weddings, but the chefs that do work there are amazing. And then some of the caterers, some of the top-notch caterers, the food is outstanding. So with a wedding menu, often they'll give you like a choice, and you have to kind of select from the choice, and it feels like it's going to be quite restrictive, but even within that, they're willing to like adapt and tweak it and change it for you, and like add in ingredients that maybe you do or don't like, and that sort of thing to add in or take away. But you end up with some really lovely stuff. And I've done weddings where I did one once where we had like food stations, and so we had like the curry station and the burger station, and I can't remember what else, or the Mexican like taco station. So we did like this whole like travel international kind of feel to this wedding, and then one could go pick and choose, and the guests loved it, and the food was delicious. But then even like with lovely sit down meals, I did a wedding at the Ritz a couple of years ago, and they didn't even do a dessert. They did like 4 courses of savory, and it was delicious. So they had like 2 kind of starter dishes, and then like a midi dish, and then the main dish, because then after dinner we did like this whole big beautiful like dessert bar with cakes and everything. Like we totally went to town with the food. But yeah, oh my god, so London, the food in London is amazing. I'd say some of the wedding food, obviously not all of the wedding food, because sometimes I just get the supplier meal, and that's not great. But when I've actually tasted what the guests are going to taste, it has always been just like so delicious, and just like really lovely fresh ingredients, lovely choice of, and like the choices when you read the menus of what you can go for, it's like, oh, it's just such lovely delicious food. And I tell you what's London are quite good at is kind of pulling in kind of diverse food elements as well. So maybe they'll bring in like an Asian element or an Indian element, or do you mean, so they're happy to kind of bring that in, which I always love, because I always say to my couples, is there any kind of cultural heritage that you want to show in your food? What can we do? What can we have? My August couple are having bao buns for their like midnight snacks. You mean we're having like a truck to serve bao buns, because that's for them, that's important to them, sort of thing. So even though the meal itself is probably quite a traditionally English meal, we're like, oh, how can we add some extra elements here, and that's what they're going to have in the evening. So I love the way that you can bring in other kind of culture and heritage in the food menu. And I say with that one, we were like specifically choosing very English kind of menu like items, because we wanted to like treat the Americans to this kind of English menu. But I think you can do that, and because the London chefs aren't going to be like, oh, I'm not going to touch that Italian antipasti or that Greek dish. You mean they're quite happy to kind of bring in all the various cultures into the dining and really make it like a lovely fine dining experience.
I think that's why London is one of the best gastronomic experiences in the world. And I did read an article about this a couple of years ago, at the fact that because of the stereotype of British food, the gastronomic landscape in London is so diverse. Like, we bring in so many influences from everywhere else that it's just become this massive fusion of amazing cuisine. And you make an excellent point. You can find any kind of caterer in London. That's such a fantastic thing that I wish I could have, you know, in the south of Europe. If I want Eritrean food, can't find that in Portugal. They don't,
you can find it in
doesn't
London.
exist. But in London, you can have shawarma at the end of your night at a wedding in London. It just doesn't exist in Portugal.
I had like I had amazing Lebanese catering at one of my weddings, and it was just, and we actually had like the Lebanese restaurant come in, and he was doing all like the shawarma and everything, and all the lovely dips on the table. And it was just like, oh my God, that was just like so delicious. Do you know what I mean? And it's that diversity of food, and really good chefs. Do you know what I mean? They know their food. They'll do like a lovely range of food. And particularly for like UK residents, they love this kind of range of food as well. That's what they go for. You mean, walk down any kind of UK high street that has restaurants, and you're going to get all sorts of different restaurants.
But that's a guarantee. Like, from wherever you are in the world, we are going to be able to find someone who can make something from your culture. And I so far in this series, I can't say that you can do that for anywhere else. So London is very unique there. But let's end on some nice places that we can look at. We love a good venue on this channel. Let us know a couple of your favorite venues.
I was trying to think of some like cool, unique places that I really love, and where I've worked mostly. So one of my favorite venues is Fitzrovia Chapel, and it really is the definition of a hidden gem. It's like, it's down like a little back street in London, and then you kind of walk into this like square that you think is like this really modern square, and sits this little kind of red brick, looks a little bit like a church because it was once a church, and you walk in and it's like, oh my God, it's like amazing. It's all like gold mosaic, and it's all and beautiful. And the thing is, it's never been a religious building. So it was part of a chapel that was part of a hospital. So it's never been religious. So you don't have to be religious to use this building. It is civil ceremonies, and obviously you can have symbolic as well. But it is stunning, like ceremony location. And it's also like it's got like a nice kind of bistro pub attached to it. So if you really wanted to, you could have like this beautiful stunning ceremony and then go to like the pub afterwards and have like a really cool dining experience next door. And I've eaten at the restaurant next door, and it's really, again, really lovely food. So that's a really cool like ceremony only venue, which hardly anyone knows about. Another really cool ceremony only venue is the Asylum Chapel, completely opposite. Again, another this was chapel and it's been deconsecrated. It's almost kind of like, it's one of those like Marmite venues, I think. You mean you either love it or you're like a bit weirded out by it. But I really love it. It's got stained glass windows. It's got that kind of like exposed wood, like stonework and stuff, brickwork, and it's got this lovely stage, and they fill it with candlelight on the kind of the little stage. And it's just got a really cool vibe. I've done a couple of weddings there now, and actually both the weddings I did there were winter weddings as well, so it was a little bit chilly, and we did have to put heaters on, but then we had like blankets, and that was the one we did the pie and mash at. So after they did this like quite early ceremony, everyone had like mulled wine and pie and mash just to like keep them warm and everything. It's in the most slightly random location because it's in Peckham, but overlooking like a Toys R Us. But that doesn't matter because then you're kind of right, like it's quite easy to like get into central London from that. So they're kind of like my top two like ceremony only venues. And then my other kind of thought, well, cool wedding, if I was where I've done like quite a cool wedding for like bigger numbers, because we've done quite small, these have all been quite small venues, but if you were looking for somewhere like bigger numbers, I love Trinity Boy Wharf. So I always love a venue that overlooks the river, and Trinity Buoy Wharf is right on the river. You can see the O2 Arena in the background. You can even get like a boat, so you can do your drinks reception on the boat and then come into it. And it's a real blank canvas space. It's easy, like you can do a lot with the space. And they also slightly extend the end time, which not a lot of London venues necessarily do, those kind of like slightly end times. So most venues you probably have to be out by midnight, but with the Trinity Buoy Wharf you could potentially stay until 2 a.m, which is great. So if you want to like party vibe, a lot of your guests and everything. So yeah, there was just a few quick venues that I kind of love in London.
No, those are a fantastic selection. I know all of those and they are all fabulous. I want to add in one more. It's like my spirit place, and that is the nurseries, Petersham Nursery.
Oh yes, love Petersham Nurseries.
It's so unique. It's so unique. If anyone doesn't know what a nursery is, it's where they grow plants, baby plants. It's a garden centre essentially, and it's literally my spirit place. I love it so much. It's such a unique space, and if you're a botanical couple who wants a lot of greenery around you in the middle of the city, this is a really odd choice to go for, but an amazing one.
But I've done a blog post on like 10 like orangery outdoor wedding venues, and seriously it's one of the most popular wedding like blogs I've got on my blog post I've got on my blog, because everyone loves an orangery style wedding venue, don't they? I think it's all that beautiful greenery and all that glass and being close to nature, and yet you can be right in the heart of the city and yet like not necessarily feel like you are, because it's so like beautiful and everything. So I do love an orangery wedding venue.
Yeah, so I just had to add that one in, because if you do want the botanical vibe, then that is an incredible one. But I also love the other venues that you left, and we're going to leave the links to those in the description box down below. I want to thank you so much for your time, Andri. Thank you so much for coming onto my channel. If anyone watching wants to get married in London or anywhere in the UK, how can they get in contact with you?
So my website is alwaysandri.co.uk, and I'm Always Andri Weddings on Instagram as well.
Wonderful. So we're going to leave that on the screen. We're going to leave that in the description box down below and pinned to the top comment. I want to thank you again so much for your time, for coming onto my channel, for making us smile, for talking about my home place so beautifully. And if anyone wants to get in contact with Andri, then the links are all down below. I love you and leave you for now. Take care.
Thank you for having me. I've loved it. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Bye.